Question. Hey Kim, a lot of people I know, myself included, deal with this feeling of being stuck in their current conditions. I've experienced this too. I've looked at my psychology in depth, done spiritual practices, looked at things from every angle I can think of, yet I still feel stuck in some ways. I sense that part of the answer is to let go or surrender. But I'm rather enthusiastic and impatient, so I get frustrated when things don't move as quickly as I'd like. Any comments would be appreciated. Okay. It's a very common experience. I've certainly experienced it myself several times, and I think most spiritual people experience this, that you feel stuck. And there are different ways you can explain it. But I know in myself, I also have this, you can call it an impatience, but I don't know if it's just impatience. Like, just to give you an example, let's say I have to do a specific physical job. Let's say it's building a shed in the garden. All of my life when I look back, even also when I had jobs and work jobs, whenever I have to do a task, it's like when I start the task, there's a clock that starts ticking in my mind. Because I have an idea that it should take a certain amount of time. And if I feel it's going too slowly, tension starts building. And I can see the same thing with my spiritual path. It's like you start something, you're expecting a certain outcome, like a certain state of consciousness or whatever it is, and I kind of feel like I should achieve this in a certain amount of time. And if I don't, then I start feeling a certain tension. And where does this come from? Well, I think this is a dual explanation, because part of it comes from a subconscious self that's just impatient with myself. And I realized this some time ago, that I've definitely had this conglomerate of subconscious selves that are always pushing me to go faster on the spiritual path. And when I looked at it and dealt with it, I certainly overcame some of that. So I'm more patient today than I was, say, 10 years ago. But I also think there's another aspect of it, and it is that, as I said, we have a life plan or divine plan that we created before we came into embodiment. And part of that life plan is that we want to make certain spiritual progress, we want to resolve certain things in our psychology. And the divine plan has a certain timetable. So you could say, for example, that in your divine plan, you see, again, as I've said, when we make our divine plan, we see more clearly than we do when we're in embodiment. So we can look at our coming embodiment. We can say, I see I have this unresolved psychology from past lifetimes. I want to resolve that in this lifetime. And I want to resolve it before a certain age. Because the other aspect of my divine plan is to want to do something for the world, for other people. And in order to do this fully, I have to resolve this psychology. So, say, I have this psychology. I want to resolve that before I'm 30, because at the age of 30, I want to start doing this outer activity that helps other people. And I have to resolve the psychology before I get there. So now you come into embodiment, you're of course forgetting this, but you have a certain intuitive sense. But you come to a point where now you're approaching that time where you wanted to resolve that psychology, but you sense that you haven't resolved it. So intuitively, you're starting to feel impatient, or you're feeling stuck. And this is simply because you have an intuitive sense you're behind the timetable of your divine plan. So therefore, you're starting to feel stuck. You're starting to feel, oh, there's this, something should happen. Why isn't this happening? Why am I not moving? And what's the cause of it? The cause is you haven't seen what it is in your psychology. Now, I understand that the person who's asking the question, saying, I've looked at my psychology in depth, done spiritual practices, looked at things from every angle I can think of, and yet I still feel stuck. So there are many people in the world who haven't started looking into psychology, haven't done spiritual practices. And they can feel stuck because they just haven't even started looking at their psychology. But when you have this experience, I mean, the question sort of has the answer. You have looked into your psychology, yes. But the very fact that you feel stuck can only mean one thing. There's something in your psychology you haven't seen yet. Otherwise, you wouldn't feel stuck. And I'm not saying I haven't felt stuck also, because there was something in my psychology I hadn't seen. But I have over the years realized, because I've been on the path for so long, that whenever I have felt stuck, it was because there was something in my psychology I had not seen. And so it's always a matter of saying, okay, maybe I've seen a lot of things in my psychology, but what is there I haven't seen? And this goes for me today. I'm still on a regular basis asking the Ascended Masters, help me see what I haven't seen. And I've even started asking them, help me see what I can't even ask about. Because sometimes you have a sense there's something that's hiding and you're asking for clarity about that. But there's things that you can't even see yet. So I started asking that way as well. It goes back to this situation with when the United States invaded Iraq back in 2000, I think it was 4, there was this defense secretary called Donald Rumsfeld, and he gave this famous talk where he said, there are known knowns and known unknowns, but there are also unknown unknowns. This was his excuse for why they hadn't achieved the results that they were expected to achieve. But anyway, but there are unknown unknowns in our psychology. They are unknown yet. So all I'm saying is, if you feel stuck, there's something you haven't seen. And the temptation, and this is what most people in the world do, is that a lot of people I know have this feeling of being stuck in their current conditions. Well, I understand that there can be current conditions that you feel stuck in. For example, if you have small children, you can very well feel stuck there, because what they don't tell you before you become a parent is that this is the end of your life as you know it, the moment you have a child. But nevertheless, I'm not saying there can't be physical conditions that you can't change, but as a spiritual person, you take your path to a higher level when you realize that it's not about the outer conditions. It's about your state of mind, your reaction to the outer conditions. So it's not really the outer conditions that make you feel stuck. It's the feeling of being stuck that makes you stuck. And the feeling of being stuck is because there's something you haven't seen. You haven't seen the mechanism in your psychology that causes you to react to your outer conditions the way you are reacting. You haven't questioned it. And sometimes you can have this epiphany that makes you see it if you open yourself to it. You can go into a neutral state of mind. You can really come to see it. Other times you have to fight a little bit for it. You have to look at it from different angles. And I understand that the person is saying, I have looked at things from every angle I can think of. Yes. That's why you need to start looking at it from angles that you haven't thought of so far. So the way I look at it that helps me sometimes is this good old saying, you can't see the forest for the trees. And this is very true. If you are inside the forest, all you see are the trees. So what do you have to do? Well, you have to step back. You have to keep stepping back until you're outside the forest. And now, instead of looking at the individual trees that are obscuring your view, you can look at the whole and you can look at the forest. So you have to somehow start questioning what you haven't questioned so far. You have to step back and step back and step back. I've done this many times myself. I look at a situation. Why am I reacting this way? Why do I think this is the only way I can react to this situation? what are my beliefs about this situation? What are my beliefs about myself and what I can do and can't do in this situation? Is there a different way to look at the situation that I haven't seen? Is there a different way to react to the situation? Could I react to these outer conditions in a way so I don't feel stuck? And many times, let's say you have outer conditions. Let's say you have small children, for example. That was probably the time of my life when I felt the most stuck, was having small children. But this was because I reacted a certain way to having small children. And this was because I had a certain view of what it meant to have children, what my responsibility as a parent was, and I was afraid of failing in that responsibility, not doing well enough. And but I realized at some point that there were other people who had small children. They weren't feeling as tense about it as I was. They were actually enjoying it. So there came a point where I realized that because of my inattention, I hadn't fully accepted having small children, being a parent. I hadn't really accepted the situation. And I've experienced this in other situations as well. Like, for example, you have a job. There are certain conditions that are disturbing you about the job. And as a result of that, you are subconsciously resisting the situation. I had a job, for example, I was working as a technical writer for this computer company writing manuals. And there was a supervisor who had a really difficult psychology, and she was an editor, and she was very anal retentive, as they call it in the United States, very focused on detail, which most editors, by the way, are. That's why they become editors instead of writers. And I was very disturbed by it because I felt I had no creative freedom. And I realized at some point that this caused me to not actually accept the job. Just like I didn't fully accept being a parent with small children and how that impacted my life. And so what I realized over the years is that when I feel stuck, it's usually because I'm resisting something in the outer situation. Or there's always an outer situation. So I'm resisting something. And if I look at why I'm resisting, why I have the resistance, then if I resolve that subconscious self that causes me to have the resistance, I could come to a point where now nothing in the outer situation has changed. But I am accepting the outer situation. And therefore, I don't have the tension, I'm not resisting, and so I don't feel stuck. Why do you feel stuck? Because you feel the outer situation should change and it isn't changing. But where's the feeling of being stuck? Is it in the outer situation? Is it out there? Or is it an experience in your mind? So what you have to change is the experience in your mind. And you can do this. Another situation that comes to mind was my father had a difficult psychology. He was very stubborn. And there was a point in my late teens where I started an education at a university. They had a one-year basic training. And then after the year, I met my first wife there. We got married, and she wanted to move somewhere else to start another study. So I stopped studying. I took a break, which was quite common. But my father completely flipped out over this because his attitude to life was, once you start something, you have to finish it. So in other words, you start something, even if you realize you're going in the wrong direction, you still have to keep going in that direction because you have to finish something. And I didn't have that attitude. I thought if I realize this is not what I really want, then I'm just going to change. What's the big deal? So anyway, he became angry with me and we had some conflicts. And there came a point where I saw, if we continue like this, in a couple of years we won't be able to talk to each other. And given his psychology, that would probably be for the rest of our lives. So I had to decide for myself, do I want to have a relationship with my father? Or do I want to just cut it off? And I thought, well, I'd rather have a relationship with my father. So then I said, okay, if I'm going to continue to have a relationship with my father, something has to change. How likely is it that my father is going to change his psychology or his attitude to me? So if something has to change, who's going to change it? Oh yeah, this person is the only one who has the capacity to change the dynamics of the relationship. So I simply decided I would stop defending myself when my father accused me. I would stop trying to make him seem wrong so that he could see that it was wrong to accuse me. I would just, whenever he talked to me, whatever he said, I would just be positive. I would just respond positively. But what was really going on behind this was that my father was pushing one of my psychological buttons. So I felt bad about myself. And I was trying to change my father so I wouldn't feel bad about myself. And he, of course, resisted this. So, but what really was behind this was that I actually didn't accept my father for who he was, with the psychology he had. I thought he shouldn't be so stubborn. And in all fairness, it would have been better for him if he hadn't been so stubborn, because then he might be able to get along with other people. It wasn't just me he couldn't get along with. But nevertheless, I didn't accept my father for who he was with the psychology he had. And so when I made this shift, what I actually did was I just accepted him for who he was with the psychology he had. Didn't try to change it or prove him wrong. I just accepted him. I was positive. And there was a period where my father was still accusing me because he couldn't stop the pattern. But as I kept literally turning the other cheek, he just couldn't keep doing it. And it came to a point where he gradually started shifting. And after 6 months, the dynamic of our relationship had changed. Just because I had accepted him and that I didn't need to change him to feel better in myself. I need to change myself to feel better in myself, which I also worked on. But what I'm saying is this: feeling stuck is usually because we are resisting something because we haven't accepted it. And the reason we haven't accepted it is that the situation triggers a reactionary pattern of the subconscious self in our own mind. And in order to avoid the reaction, feeling bad, we want to change the outer situation so it doesn't push our buttons. But when we come to a point where we are willing to look at the button and remove the button instead of changing the outer situation, that's when we get over the sense of being stuck. And this can then lead us, as I said, when we remove the button that causes us to resist the self, we can come to the point we accept the outer situation for what it is. This means two things. First of all, if the situation, if the outer conditions don't change, your reaction has changed so you don't feel stuck anymore. But what I have experienced in my life is many, many times, when I overcame the psychology that caused me to resist, then after some time, magically, the outer situation changed. And I found myself in a different situation. This often goes with relationships, whether it's a personal love relationship or whether it's a work relationship or work situation. You learn the lesson you were meant to learn from that situation, and the situation changes. And then you move on to another situation where there might be other buttons that are being pushed, which is now your opportunity to look at those buttons. And that's the wonderful process called life.